All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sovereign Sphere podcast. I'm Karla Treadway, and I have with me today Cory Morgan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for the invitation.
It's good to have you here. I appreciate having my smart friends, but also my comedic friends on to talk about all the kooky news of the day, but also adding like a little shred of humor. So had to bring you on after the last time we met. There's nothing to do but laugh right now.
We have to. I mean, we got plenty of time to be serious, but throwing a little, joke or some sarcasm, some absurdity in now and then, as long as people realize you're being absurd, just helps keep us a little sane during these insane times.
I'm going to assume that some of my audience knows who you are. Some people might not. You're a columnist, you're a TV host. You work for the Western Standard as well as the Epoch Times. For the folks that are listening that maybe don't know who you are, can you give us just a little bit of a bio, a backstory here?
Yeah, it sort of covers it. I'm a long time politically involved Albertan. I was in the oil field for a long time. I was very active with the Wild Rose Party for people outside of Alberta. That was kind of the upstart that caused the conservative split and led to the NDP coming in for 4 years. So we got to learn some nice hard lessons there with the old careful what you wish for, you just might get it. Through that, somehow it morphed into me writing a couple of columns for an oil field publication and started writing political columns for other publications. I've just been prolific that way. So rather than doing, now I'm one of those guys who just talks about it. So it's a heck of a lot easier this way. I can just critique the others and try to forget about it when my predictions were wrong.
And how does beekeeping fit into the biography here?
Beekeeping is one of those things that keeps me moderately sane. It's a fantastic hobby. I've really enjoyed it. I live in a rural spot just outside of Calgary, and I've got the hives. I think it's important for everybody, especially if you are intensely involved in your work, whatever it might be, or if it's something like politics, to be able to do something where you'll fully disconnect at least for an hour or two a week with
Yep.
just something completely unrelated to it. So when I go out and I work my hives and I inspect them and I'm doing treatments or whatever I have to do, that gives my mind a break from all the rest of the rough and tumble of politics. And not to mention, it's great to produce some honey and they're good pollinators to keep going in the area. And once in a while, they sting the hell out of me.
I was just going to ask, how many times do you get stung?
I don't know, maybe a dozen times a year. And I still act like a 6-year-old little girl whenever I do get stung. I go screaming across the yard. I suit
It's
up.
like,
I'm not one of
how
those.
dare you? I'm your
Yeah,
caretaker.
I'm not one of those people who's out there in flip flops and shorts beekeeping. I suit up, and even then, I've discovered if you stir them up enough or you don't cover up right, they will zap you. And so I managed to get a few stings in every year.
Well,
Every time I get
how
stung, it's
many
not the end of the world.
how many huts do you have? Like, is this just enough honey for you, or is this like an apocalyptic stash of honey
Well,
that you have
it's
here?
it's turned into an apocalyptic stash this year. We had a really rainy spring out here in Alberta, and I'm in the foothills, so the bees were producing well into late August when normally they wouldn't. So I've got about 300 pounds of honey in the house now, which I'll never be able to consume that much from 4 hives. Well, I sell some to some people, and a lot family and friends get used to. If you're looking to expect any gift from me, since they've already all got copies of my book already, I bring them honey.
Maybe you can be a podcast sponsor, and also brought to you by Corey's Honey.
That's right. I got to move this stuff pretty soon. Thankfully, honey keeps forever, at least. It might crystallize, but it'll still be
Yeah.
good. So as long as it takes me to move that stuff along, it'll do fine. But yeah, I really recommend beekeeping to anybody if they got the space and the time to do
You
it.
could do it
It's a
out
nice
here.
pastime.
Yeah, we're on about 3 acres, but I'm hearing you on the hobbies. I actually just started guitar for the same reason, especially as we go into the dark winter months here in Canada. And it feels so good on my brain and it's really hard. It's a brand new skill. So I'm like really racking my brain trying to memorize these different patterns. And it's a nice break from X for sure.
Yeah, it's healthy. And that's what I like with the beekeeping too. I've only been at it 5 years. I'm still learning. There's still a world to learn. It's not a really complicated hobby, yet at the same time, there's still a whole bunch of stuff you have to pick up along the way and a whole lot of mistakes you make and have to
Mhm.
stop making. So
Awesome. So you are super passionate about Alberta, obviously. And I don't live in Alberta. I live in Ontario. Everyone's telling me to come over to Alberta. And to be honest, I don't think I could recreate what I have here. We have this really lucky spot where we're on an island. I joke about like creating my own governmental system here on our island. make it a sovereign island. If we didn't live here though, if we lived in any other place in Canada, any other city, it's a no-brainer to head down west right now. But why is it really important for you to pump up Alberta, talk about it as a sovereign nation perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to start, I don't fault any other part of the country or even other countries. I traveled a lot when I was in the oil fields surveying, and I found every province, every state, they all have cool spots and places if you want to look for them. My issue, and they got great people in every one of them too. So I mean, some of that vitriol kind of has to tamp down a bit. But something that's different with Alberta. And I found that when I was working in the States too. There's an East West thing in general. My view of it, I think it's because it was the most recently settled. 100 years ago, Alberta was still tiny. It was the frontier. People were coming here from somewhere else to make a fortune, and they had that attitude of that, and they welcomed that when others followed them. Same with Texas. I feel that out there, or Oklahoma when I worked out there. So you get a different atmosphere to it, and much more of a freedom one, because there were people who escaped something typically rather than having been born into it. It's not to
Mhm.
knock everybody again in the more settled areas, but Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, or if we're looking in New York, Pittsburgh, those places have people there for hundreds of years. You've got old families, you've got old cultures, you've got a different mindset.
Right.
Alberta still has a lot of that Wild West, and that's happened all the way into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, because it's just been an oil field destination, people coming again to make a future for themselves. So there's a real freedom loving community. But I think, as we both kind of agree, we're into a growing authoritarian world. And every province, every country is dealing with this. It seems the governments are getting bigger, they're getting more intrusive. But what I do see out here is a bit more of a bastion, at least a larger number of people who are saying, no, we're going to push back. We're going to fight back against this. I've always had a big beef with the Canadian system, constitutionally. And I don't think, I can't see any other way to fix this with a kind of tearing it down first, which means independence. And I believe Alberta has the most potential, or Quebec. One of these provinces has to sort of tear out so we can redraft the deal if it's to be redrafted. So that's where a lot of my political focus has been for a long time.
Which is really exactly what Brian Peckford said when I interviewed him. Not necessarily Alberta independence, but that there is no saving the system as is, and it needs to be torn down and completely rebuilt because just the way it's currently designed, it's so flawed. We can't recover.
Exactly. And I mean, for people as gray as me, I was still pretty young at the time, but I was a political dork. So I was watching that with Charlottetown and Meech Lake. Like, these were attempts to change the Constitution that were relatively modest, in my view. I mean, I believe it needs much bigger reforms than even what were proposed there. And neither of those attempts came even close to changing anything. Now it's 30 some years later, nobody even tries because they know we can't change it. So we got two options. We accept that this, half baked system is going to be what we're going to live under for the rest of our lives, or we look to the one and only way to get out of it, which means we need a catalyst, which is, in my view, the best one I can think of is a province actually exiting the system itself. And then the deal's off. Then you've got the world's your oyster. Now we can redraft something presumably better than what we left.
Now, do you think it can actually separate? Brett Wilson says, "Okay, fine. What do you want? Do you want a wall? Do you want a moat?" Like that's what he goes to. Do you think it can actually separate, or this is more like a Quebec style? We have leverage now, and we're going to get more of the things that we want.
Yeah, and I know Brad, and we agree on most things, but we're different when it comes to the federalism, that's for sure. No, I believe we can fully separate. We can have a separate system. We can have a border. People read a lot too much into this. I think maybe that's a North American thing of being used to being in such large countries. Look to Europe. There are dozens of countries smushed together with borders, with distinction, with cultural differences, with different political systems. It's not that foreign a concept over there. We don't need to build a big bunch of walls. We don't need a bunch of moats. But yeah, we could potentially have border crossings, much like we have with the United States. It depends on the relationship. An example I
Yeah.
like to use a lot is Norway and Sweden. Those were actually a union at one point. They were one unit. And in 1905, they split in a referendum, became
Hmm.
two distinct countries. And it was peaceful. I'm sure there were, this was a long time ago, but I imagine it was probably still pretty, I mean, it's a big affair to have, a union split like that. But you look at them today, they're two very distinct countries, yet at the same time, they're very close. The relationship is tight. They have a passportless border, but they still have distinctive governments and systems between the two of them. So it's not
Well, this is
unimaginable that we could do something like that.
I was just out for dinner last night, and there was a couple from the East Coast there, and they were showing us, these 2 little islands. Now, they haven't separated, it's always been this way, but on the East Coast of Canada, there are 2 tiny little islands that are actually a part of France.
Yeah, Saint
Have
Pierre
you
and
ever heard?
Miquelon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've never heard of this before. You look at a map, it's nowhere near France, but they're like, "Yeah, you need your passport to go to these islands," which are just a ferry ride away from the East Coast of Canada, and they speak French, you need a French passport in there, and a completely different country right there.
yeah, and it functions. I mean, that's sort of an arm of France. It's just kind of a unique little pod. It's a neat trivial point to bring up though. I mean, they're like fishing communities on there and some degree of
Yeah,
tourism, and people rarely mention it, but you're very close to the Canadian coast, and we have this little corner of France sitting over there.
yeah. Just hop over to France for lunch, like, it's that
Yeah,
close. Yeah.
so we've got to kind of reimagine borders. The concepts of it. I mean,
Mhm,
really, all it is, they're contracts. They're surveyed lines in the sand, but
mhm,
it doesn't mean we have to be vitriolic with each other. It doesn't mean the relationship has to be bad. It just means now the contract is changed from this part to that part. They're running under
mhm.
this, they're running under that. I mean, the Constitution really is nothing more than a contract that's supposed to bind the country. So we would split that into separate ones and then come up with our agreements with each other. People take it way too personally. I mean, it's not, of course they do. I mean, it's a country you're grown in, you were raised in. There's feelings of patriotism and pride, but we've got to start realizing that this system isn't serving us, neither in Alberta or in the rest of the country. It's another conversation I've had with Bruce Party, who's from Queen's University, a professor out there. But this could fix the rest of the country too. That's part of why he, an
Mm.
Ontarian, is quite pumped on Alberta independence. Not that he's planning on popping out here to live in an independent Alberta, but he sees again that ability. If a province can break out, it would give us the means to start drafting new constitutions, modern ones that can better reflect now. I mean, we got to remember our current constitution was written 150 years ago. Why are we assuming this is a piece of perfection? Obviously, I mean, and there were some changes when Trudeau patriated it, but it has to be. We have to be able to change it, or it's going to be obsolete, and that's what's happening. It's not serving the balance of the country now. It's not allowing for regional differences, regional development, and we're seeing that failure. We're seeing unity issues going on. We're seeing bad government happening. We're seeing freedoms that aren't being properly protected, and I don't believe, as you said, with Brian Peckford, they thought they were preserving freedoms with what they drafted and wrote. And it's turned out that unfortunately, the charter's almost turned into a club now to oppress people rather than protect their individual rights. So, how do we change that? And I'm all ears if people can tell me of a system to reform it with anything short of an independence movement, and I'll certainly help support that. But I don't realistically see anything else coming. And independence is still quite a ways from going there as well. The activists are pretty excited and outspoken, but realistically, I think if a referendum was held tomorrow, they'd be lucky to get 30%. But that's still not insignificant. When you have 1 in 3 people saying, I would like to be out of this deal, that's pretty substantial. And that can grow. And I don't see how it won't grow considering the status quo.
Yeah, I assumed in the beginning when I started hearing rumblings of this that it was actually just like a really, really small portion of Albertans, like rural Albertans, and it's actually not the case. That number seems to grow every single day.
It does, and there's been some questionable polls, even one run by the Western Standard that I worked with. But not that the Standard tried to rig it or something, but you use pollsters that go. It seems that goes into areas where you get more favorable results than you would expect. So it was showing 44 to 49%, but there were a lot of individual polling companies, larger ones outside of that. And this was commissioned by papers like the Globe and Mail and such. They do not support Western independence, and they're finding 30% going on. That means it's there, it's real, and it's more than just rural. It's stronger in the rural areas, but it's real. And I mean, revolutions, and I don't want to use that term like there's going to be a revolution exactly coming from Alberta, but a lot have started from a much smaller base of support than 30% where we're sitting at right now. So people being dismissive of it, do so at your peril because this is real. It doesn't mean it may never hit that 60% number I think it needs to hit for independence to happen, but It's not going to go away, and it's not something you can just ignore and it'll fade. Something has to change.
How do you think Danielle Smith is handling this issue? When I watch her from the outside, I'm listening to mainstream media talk about her as a traitor and an extremist, and everything that she's saying seems to be really reasonable to me. She's not a separatist. She's just representing the people of Alberta and giving people options. My opinion is that it seems a very rational, logical approach. But how do you think Danielle is handling this issue in these fighting groups?
Yeah, well, she's doing as good a job as she can, in my view. Well, she can always do better, I guess. It's it's a tough
Mhm.
job, but for the most part, I think she's been doing well, and she's getting it from both sides, which maybe shows that you're doing the right thing as a politician. The hardcore independence movement is screaming and yelling, jumping up and down, saying she's got to support independence. She's got to support independence. Well, again, like I said, that's 30% of the province, and that's a deal breaker issue. If she came out and said all of a sudden, yes, that's it, I'm for independence, half her support's going to disappear. We're going to have
Mhm.
Premier Nenshi, and then you're never going to get a referendum. And she
Yeah.
wasn't. She wasn't elected on that. She didn't
Right.
campaign on that. And I don't know her own views, but she's shown no indication that she's supportive of full out independence. Now, on the other side of that, she's supportive of citizens initiated referendum and gave us the mechanism to be able to hold it and saying, well, let citizens decide that, which is where it should be. I don't want it decided in the legislature. I want it decided by Albertan citizens in a vote. She's
Mhm.
given us that mechanism. We didn't have that before. As well, she's doing, I think, as far as an independence advocate, everything I want to see happen. I want to see that 30% grow to 60%. And I spent a long time at this. I led the Alberta Independence Party. I guess when you're asking about some of my background, I formed that party back when I was 29 years old, ran it in the 2001 election when I was 30, and Ralph Klein mopped the floor with us. And I learned a lot of valuable lessons at the time. But what I learned as well with why people aren't jumping right on board is, as said as they are, they still want to try everything else first. They really that other 30% we need, they still see independence as a last resort. So you've
Mhm.
got to run through the list of trying everything else. And you know what? Premier Smith has been doing that. She's been making the list of things saying, this is what you have to change. And BC, this is what you've got to do over here. And Alberta, this is what we got to do here. And if those things fail, which some of them, if not all of them, might, well, that's going to cover that checklist for all that 30% of people who were waiting to try everything else. She's trying everything else right now. And then you
Mm.
will get towards that support number you want. So she's doing what she was elected to do. And no, she might not succeed with a lot of those initiatives, but each one of those initiatives she fails on creates more dedicated independent supporters. So people get worked up and taking a quote out of context to her once she said her job is to make sure a yes vote doesn't happen. Now, what she was saying wasn't saying she doesn't want to see a referenda held. She never said that. If she didn't want one, she wouldn't have had to give us the legislation. That very easy. She could just say there isn't going to be one. That's in her authority and power. But what she was saying is if she could fix things within Canada, people would never feel they have to vote yes in the referendum in the first place. So
Mhm.
again, it goes back to trying everything else first. It's
Mhm.
not her saying she's trying to shut down the independence movement. I guess in a sense it's that. But if she really wanted to fight against it, there's a lot more she could be doing. But is an element to the independence movement that's just a little too much. Someone I like to remind people if you keep going all or nothing, you'll almost always get nothing. So you've got to use a little bit of patience, a little bit of compromise, a little bit of rationality, and quit stomping out the bloody door every time you don't get your way. It
Mhm.
takes some time. You don't always win every battle. And our instinct, we're worked up, we're tired, we're impatient. I understand that. I've been
Mhm.
at it since I was 29 and I'm considerably past that age now. But we aren't going to get there by constantly ripping at each other and taking on an unrealistic attitude.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Like, it seems like we have lost our ability to appreciate anyone who's maybe moderate right now. It's here's my 10 demands. I need all of these 10 demands done tomorrow, or we're going to get you ousted and you're not going to be premier anymore. That seems to be the attitude right now, which is a little egoic, and really you need to sway people to your side. Like, not everybody thinks like you. We have to also sway the moderate, so we have to act moderate. Tell me more about like how like the freedom movement or people in the independence movement are hurting themselves by being extreme. What are they doing?
Well, there's a core bunch that kind of, as you said, once they've gotten a chip on their shoulder, then they turn all of their opposition towards the premier, and anything and everything she says, they're going to go after her. One example, it's a tiny group of people. That's the thing that has to be recognized in this too, but a vocal one and a potentially problematic one. So we've got this Republican Party that formed up. It's an interesting one, this one. Somehow they raised six figures overnight. Somehow it was broken up 5,000. A whole bunch of people gave the maximum $5,000 donations each. Wow, amazing. Astounding. All these people had never been visible in politics before. I'll just let other people read into that and look at the election disclosures to see and wonder about that. And you got to remember the man who's running it has been fined repeatedly for breaking election laws in the past. Just food for thought. But that man also has an extreme chip on his shoulder with Premier Smith. And it just seems like his whole focus isn't to build an independent Alberta. It's just to tear Smith out of power. Before this Republican Party sprouted out of the ground like an ugly weed, this same gentleman was involved with a few of the other chronic malcontents during the AGM last year, the largest AGM ever held politically. There were 6,000 people in Red Deer. And they were trying to stir a movement for the leadership review to rip Danielle out of power because clearly she wasn't being, again, extreme enough. She wasn't pushing hard enough. She wasn't up to our standards. And she ended up winning over 90% in that. That's showing as much as these guys could raise and the stink and push and organize. And they did some dirty stuff and putting pamphlets out claiming she was in league with Muslim groups, all sorts of garbage. And it failed dismally. And they're at it again. And they're going to try. They're pushing for the AGM this year, saying they got to get policy things pushed through to turn the UCP into an independence party. Again, Head Nenshi will be thrilled if that actually happens. They're an irritant and they're problematic, and they're the ones that people point to when they say, I can't support that movement. Yeah. And that's part of the issue. So they aren't getting anywhere, but they're providing themselves as a vocal example that keeps the moderate people who are sitting on the fence considering it or not considering it from jumping in and becoming supportive of this. This comes back to kind of what I concluded in my book and other things, why it has to come to a referendum rather than a political party. The political parties fail in independence movements in Alberta. They always have. We've had dozens of them. I led one. They're lucky to break a few percent in any election ever. And then they fall apart because they fight with each other. It has to go to the people in a referendum. And that way, these little pockets, they can do what they please. But as long as the focus is on the independence movement itself in a referendum, that's sustainable. But it's an issue we're dealing with out here in Alberta. And these chronic malcontents are never going to go away. They're people who have a true degree, and I've watched them because it's the same people over and over, and you get exhausted with it. Chronic oppositional disorder. They get involved with something, they build it up, they're enthusiastic. I mean, it's not to say they're not smart, they're hardworking. But again, one thing goes wrong, one person says the wrong thing, and they turn on their heel, they lose it, and they come into full opposition mode and stomp out the door. And they're just destructive. And they have to be quarantined.
Do these people have big audiences? Do you think it's kind of gotten to their heads that they have more sway or power than maybe they think?
No, their audiences don't look that big. I mean, if we look at social media roundups or what they manage to pull in for meetings or things like that. But you don't need a big audience to make a lot of noise now.
Yeah, that's true.
The people opposed to independence, for example, CTV Global, Legacy Media, things like that. Who do they go to when they want to talk about the independence movement? Usually the leader of the Republican Party, the guy who got 1% support in a by-election in Edmonton recently. But they put him as the voice of the movement out there. So that does give the impression to other people that this guy speaks for a lot of people. And but you don't hear about large rallies being held by this party. You don't hear about, you don't see, the leader has an X account with 3,000 or 4,000 followers or something. Maybe there's a few more. I haven't looked that closely. But it can be amplified. And it can be perceived as something more than what it is. And I mean, what's that saying? Though people say it in a more positive sense, you want to see the difference that something small can make in somebody's life. Look what a mosquito can do, one mosquito, when you're trying to sleep at night. It could be incredibly annoying and cost you a lot of sleep and time and energy. And likewise with playing whack-a-mole with some of the less principled bunches in the independence movement can really distract from something that's still a huge monumental task to be done, which was the Alberta Prosperity Project, for example, is doing a really good job on. They've screwed up some things too, but they've been doing very good work for the most part. They're drawing big crowds. They're organizing heavily. And the funny thing is, you virtually never hear about them in legacy media.
No, and it's more of a boots on the ground approach. And I'm trying to land myself in a place that's a little bit more moderate these days. I was out with friends the other night, and the one gentleman shares a lot of the beliefs that we have, and he can get really heated about them, and he was complaining about the different things that are happening in the city. And then another friend, very different political opinions than me, he yelled at the gentleman complaining about all the things that were going wrong in our city. He yelled at him. He said, "Stop being so negative." And what I know to be true about this man that was like yelling at him to just stop being the mosquito, stop yelling, stop complaining, is that man, even though I really disagree with his politics, he does everything he can to make our town as good as it can be. He owns multiple businesses, he participates in the chamber, he participates in city council. He's doing like whatever he can to make change, and he's not like a loud voice on the internet. And that just reminds me of like a lot of the things that are happening like in the shadows, in the political sphere. People are doing work. Like they are doing work, and it takes time. And I think it's something that a lot of people are negating. Like there is change, and it might not be the way you want it to materialize. Might not be fast enough. It might not be in line with your political agenda. But we're yelling at these people, like Danielle, that
Mhm.
she's trying to get stuff done, just maybe not as fast as they want. You know?
Well, that's it. I mean, get off your butt and do something then. You know, that's part of it too. Some of the loudest voices, and to be fair, some of the loudest malcontents, they're doing something. They're trying to tear things down. They're actually leaving the house. Okay, I'll give them that much credit.
Yeah.
But otherwise, a lot of them are just keyboard warriors. You don't see them at meetings. You don't hear them donating to anything. You don't hear about them door knocking or speaking at events. They're
Mhm.
just online and being, reactive. I mean, I'm crabby and negative in a lot of ways. That's part of my being a columnist, but I like to propose solutions while I'm at it too. And
Yeah.
I do things, here's the problem, here's what needs to be done. And I can respect people who get off their butts because that is how stuff gets done. There's an example in Calgary. The civic elections are going on right now. There's a guy whose name is Gar. That's his real name. He's of African origin. He lives in Forest Lawn, which is kind of the rough end of the city,
Mhm.
but he's running for city council and he's pretty far left. I don't think he would make a very good counselor whatsoever, but
Yeah.
he has worked his butt off in the community. Like he gets out there, he's rounded up bicycles and everything. And then for immigrant kids who are getting in trouble, getting in gangs, everything else, he's actually been gathering them in parks, fixing up the bicycles, giving them bikes. Like it's the poorer part of town.
Mhm.
He holds camps out there. He holds community cleanup events. He gets out the door. He doesn't just bitch about what's going on around him. He goes out
Uh-huh.
and works on it. So I still don't want to see him in council because he's too far left, but I've got nothing but admiration for him. And he'll
Yeah.
probably, in a lot of ways, accomplish a lot more than whoever wins that council seat out in his area. Leave your comfort
Yeah.
zone a little, folks. Get out on the ground. Get your ear there. See people face to face.
Yeah. Go
It's
touch grass.
funny. It's funny because when I get on X, I get people. Well, I invite it because I'm a prick on there, anyways. But I mean, I get, very my inbox and the emails as well could be pretty lively. But I do a lot of public speaking events as well. And
Uh-huh.
it's really rare at a public speaking event when I'll stand in front of a few hundred people when anybody's screaming and shouting at me. Occasionally it happens, but not that often. Well, where do they all go? Because you were all there on X the other day. Well, when they're face to face, it's amazing how polite most people suddenly get. Again, shows that.
I experience that every day going into town. There's so many people that have just hated me because of my content. And
Mhm.
then I know it rattles them when they see me face to face, and I'm just nice and fun. It probably drives them crazy, and I know they're not gonna say anything to my face.
Well, yeah. Again, it disarms people too, and I think
Yes.
it's important to get together at these meetings. It
Yeah.
humanizes each other. It helps us realize that that we are actually people on the other side of these screens and these keyboards and these apps. That's where I was saying when I was talking about the Alberta Prosperity Project for people out east who aren't familiar. It is a group. It's an independence group, but they're not a political party. They've just been pushing for the referendum and organizing all over the province. And the very basis of it has been it has to be in the hundreds now of town hall meetings they've held over the last few years all over the province, but very focused on that getting people together in person. And I tell you what,
Mhm.
that's how a movement gets growing. Getting a bunch of people together on a group on Meta or on Instagram or X is one thing. They're great tools for organizing, but to build a movement that has strength, get people in the same room, and they're doing
Yeah.
that. And that's where they're accomplishing things. Their public persona. There's been some questions about some of their leadership and some of the things they've said, or some of their more abrasive personalities. But as far as their actual effort and work, they've
Uh-huh.
been phenomenal. And ironically, again, you hear almost nothing about them in legacy media. Nothing. Well, the reason is
Sure.
because They want the nuts. Like, I'll follow up with a bit more of a story to show, though, the impression people are getting. I was speaking at an event Rebel was holding in Red Deer with about 500 or 600 people. It was an independence thing back in June, I think it was. And there was it was whenever the G8 summit was going on, because there was all sorts of international media came up because they were kind of interested in that. It was a side thing. So this reporter from the Washington Post came, sit down. I talked with her for 20 minutes. She asked for a chat. And about a week later, a big, long, and it was put in CNN and shared a few big, long story about the independence movement in Alberta and all these people they spoke with. Not a word out of me. But they found a few lunatics they quoted. And it's not that I'm the picture of sanity, especially if you see some of the stuff that I post online. But when it comes to the independence stuff, I like to think most of the stuff I'm talking about is rational and making points. So you know what they did? That didn't fit their
Mhm.
narrative. So then it didn't make the print. And a week later, I did another interview with the Walrus. This was a Zoom interview with a guy, half an hour with him. Not a single word of that went into his story when the story got printed. Both were only listening to me, hoping I would say something right off the wall. And
Yeah.
since I didn't, then it didn't make it to the text person.
I had that exact same experience at the We Unify event in Victoria. I was
Mm.
kind of handling media, and CTV and CBC, they would try and sneak into the event. And my job was to find the reporters, put them in the media room, and make sure they actually watch the show, like who was speaking. And they kept on trying to sneak out. And they wanted to just sneak out and find the craziest looking person who was there or one of the counter protesters outside to talk to them. Any of the interviews that I did, they didn't print them either. And they painted us as a like an anti-trans hate event. Nobody spoke about about gender, about trans, nobody at the event. Meanwhile, we have people like David Charalambos, whose organization is called Reaching People, and how to have peaceful dialogue with people that you disagree with. And then we had like a pastor doing prayers. I'm like, why don't you cover this? Like what is actually happening? It's so scary what media does now.
Yeah, and I hope more people cut through it and realize a little bit of what they're getting. I mean, technically, everything they report, what you were talking about, or the ones I was talking about, they didn't misreport anything. They just skipped a whole heck of a lot. So you never saw the whole picture. And it's a very devious way you can
Yeah.
spin and change the news without actually putting out something fake. And it's done all the time. By the same token, we know that social media isn't necessarily the most reliable source of information for ourselves either. We got more access to information than we've ever had at any point in human history, but we've also got more access to BS than we've ever had. And it
Yeah.
leads to personal responsibility, really. We've got to kind of look for ourselves and research. If anything seems questionable, maybe look a little more closely. And at every source you're looking at, whether you heard it from the Western Standard, though I know all of our stuff is always factual, or something as crazy as CBC. But we got to dig in for ourselves. So we take anything at face value. You're just asking to be led perhaps down the wrong garden.
100%. Well, and if we can't pull out like the good and the bad, like even let's say CBC actually reports on something truthfully, like we have to give them like kudos when there's like actually a good story. Otherwise, we're no better than the liberal women pounding Tylenol because Trump said don't have Tylenol. I just did a story on that yesterday.
Mhm.
We're the same. Like I think about that all the time with like the people that I disagree with, even Carney. Like if Carney does something good, I'm gonna applaud him. If he lets us have pipelines, if he basically does the opposite of what is in his book, I'm gonna give him props.
Well,
But just
see,
this idea of yeah,
CBC still actually does some great investigative pieces. But you got to cut through a lot of BS to find them because they
yeah,
clutter their whole site with woke crap. But they're one of the only uh, outlets anymore, unfortunately, with a budget so massive that they can say, okay, we're going to dedicate you to this, and here's a month, go after it. No other
yeah.
publication can afford that anymore. Those days are gone. And they,
Mhm.
they break and dig into some pretty good stuff now and then. Globe and Mail, they were the ones, them and Global, who broke the whole Chinese interference thing a few years ago. We forget it was legacy media that broke those. I mean, there's a lot of independent media broke
Yeah.
all sorts of wonderful things too. So don't discount everything. I crap on the legacy media all the time. That's part of my job. But I mean, it's not to say they don't have some very talented reporters and others that dig in. But at the same time, as I said, you scroll through the CBC news site and you're seeing 90% woke garbage all the
Yeah.
way through with an agenda. But watch for some of those gems sometimes because they do have the resources to do some deep dives that independent outlets might not necessarily have, and they can have some good information in those. So That's what I mean. It's on us. We kind of got to look a little harder. People don't like to hear that all the time, but you got to do a little more work if you want to get the true picture.
It's hard. There was a party here this summer, and there were some reporters from the Globe and Mail and CBC, and I was like, when I saw that they were here, I'm like,
Yeah,
mainstream media.
I
It's
know.
so hard.
Well, and they've done so much horrible stuff, and we saw it during we really did
Yeah.
see an awakening that came out during the truckers convoy during the
Mhm.
pandemic. I mean, our subscriptions at the Standard exploded during the truckers convoy, and we would talk to people, say, why are so many people seeking us out and paying to subscribe to our publication now? I mean, we're happy for it, but most of them was the same thing. They say, and I was watching what's going on in Ottawa, and I flipped the channel from CBC to CTV to Global, and it's the exact same thing in all three channels, and I can tell that something's wrong, something's loaded here. I'm not getting the full picture. They could sense it, they could feel it, so that they
Yeah.
said, I've got to seek out something else. I've got to look further. And they kind of exposed themselves as agenda driven media in that event. And
Mhm.
it changed the dynamic. The up and coming, the Rebel, True North, Western Standard, Epic Times. We were all doing all right. Post millennial, we're coming along. But we really exploded on the scene once the media really exposed themselves and embarrassed themselves during that period. Hopefully people just realize that you've just got to keep paying attention, and you'll sense it when it's wrong. People can smell bullshit
Mhm.
if they're looking for it.
Yeah, I was really disheartened after Charlie Kirk died, and the media's reaction to it here just immediately went to, "Oh, well, he was divisive and controversial and far right," and we're basically, like, condoning what happened to him. That was, like, their immediate go-to. Like, "Are you insane?"
Yeah, it was vile, and the public in general, I think, didn't respond well to that.
I hope
That also showed that those that were that insensitive and tone deaf, who were putting that messaging out and everything, they were getting roasted. These were those self-appointed activist media sorts, and not even realizing how much they were going to sour people on themselves by putting that crap out. I mean, there's other people that embraced what they were saying with that, but for the most part, people were like, "Whoa, whoa!" I mean, let the body cool. This is just a matter of humanity. If somebody went out and shot David Suzuki tomorrow, I mean, that would be 100% wrong and horrible and awful. And you know what? I really, really cannot stand David Suzuki. I can't stand all the things he's done this last few decades. But you know what I would do? I would spend 2 to 3 weeks just to shut my mouth about David Suzuki, condemn the shooting, and then maybe once things have all calmed down, then in a retrospective, I can still say, okay, these are the things this man did that were not good in an activism point of thing. But just as a human, you just shut the hell up for a few weeks. This is a tragedy. This is a crime. This
Mhm.
is wrong, and many in our legacy media, in our academia, in our political halls, the mask came off. And as upsetting as it was to watch those ghouls doing that, I kind of think it was good because they exposed themselves, and people won't forget that.
Now, as someone in media, I know you can't get in people's heads, but the average journalist that's working for CTV and CBC, do you think they're aware of how much vitriol there is against them? How much people hate them? Like, do you think that their heads are held high, that they really think that they're doing the right thing? Are they just doing what they're told? I'm just kind of flabbergasted that everyone's not leaving these organizations, I guess, at this point.
Well, there's a few things going on. For one, there's nowhere else for them to go. Media is just not a big area full of jobs right now. If you're looking to pay your bills, you came out of Carleton or somewhere with a degree in this, you don't have a lot of options in front of you. So
Mhm,
some of these people in there, I think, might be quite principled, but they're doing where their editors or wherever are pushing them, and where they have to, and they do know that the public is not exactly being happy with it. There's also some degrees of cognitive dissonance going on. They're just not hearing the noise. They will always just convince themselves that's just a flaky nut screaming at me. That's another flaky nut
mhm,
screaming at me, not realizing that. And yeah, some of them are flaky nuts, but okay. But some of them are also representing a larger group of people who
mhm.
have lost trust in their institution, and that goes much farther back into, you listen to discussions from Gad Sad or Francis Widdowson or other people from the universities, and you got to realize they've churned out these new reporters, and they came out through a big woke program, and they're coming into media not with the principles of wanting to report and inform Now they're activists. Now they want to change things. They want to use media as a mechanism to make change rather than to inform the public so the public can choose to make the change themselves. And that's a big change in the approach to media. And it's a very bad development.
I went to the Sean Foyt event in Winnipeg that was 2 hours from me, and right before I went, I was Googling his name just to figure out where this event was, and then this article from the Winnipeg Free Press came up, and it was their faith writer that was writing all about him and the event and what was gonna happen, and the whole thing was just littered with mega Trump supporter, far right extremist. He has views that don't actually represent Christianity, and there's just slurs throughout the entire thing. And I took some time actually to write him, and I said, "This is interesting because if you're a journalist, and I would expect that you would go to this event to cover it. Like, did you go? Did you go and see it? Because I did. I went with my own eyes to see like what actually happened. I didn't see any of that. And you're laying a lot of claims about who this man is and what he talked about, but just like generalities. But like what specifically did he say? And he wrote me back, but I kept on hammering him like, what specifically did he say
Right.
that was pro-Trump, was racist, was anti-Christian, and he couldn't give me anything back. And that's kind of the state of affairs, like the state that journalism is in now. We name call, we just paint everything with a big brush, but it doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of actual digging anymore.
No, it's agenda driven. And I said there's a couple of factors that go towards that. Some of it, as I said, is that next generation, I think, have come up with the wrong principles to go into this. Another part is a lack of resources. The thing I like to remind people of all the time, they forget about what the old days of newspapers. I'll just give some background on media, but the biggest moneymaker for newspapers was
Uh-huh.
classified ads, and everybody forgets that. Just in the 90s, the Calgary Herald alone would have thousands of classified ads in it every day, and people were paying $30 to $50 each to put those in there. Think of that revenue. They were making about 50 or 60,000 a day just on classified ads. You couldn't get a job, an apartment, a car, anything without a classified ads, a massage in a back alley, whatever. They all advertised that in the classifieds. And that revenue stream totally vanished. You think of
Right.
these newspapers that then they could keep 20 reporters on staff just in the city. So they could say, go look at this, go check that out, go do this, go do that over there. These publications don't have that anymore. They don't have the resources, they don't have the people. So they kind of rely on, they'll direct somebody, go look on social media and see what you can find out about this.
Mm.
Go get opinions over here and see what you can put together out of this. And that's leads to a lot more opinion getting into the print rather than the news. Just to be a bit self-serving, something that's different with the Western Standard. People say that in my show because Derek loves that fishbowl studio he puts me in, but it's a glass wall behind me, and the newsroom is actually right behind me. And it's
Mhm.
old school. We actually have Dave Naylor, our news editor, who was a news editor with the Sun for 30 years. And we got a bunch of reporters. We've got physical, real, actual reporters. We're one of the last publications that does it. And it's partly because Derek's cheaper than all get out, but you got to be in this business. But we really do have people who will phone and get quotes or actually leave the newsroom and go to an event or go to a conference. And not much media is doing that anymore. And we're not doing nearly as much as we should or could. Like if we had the resources to do it, it'd be great to have 30 reporters rather than the 8 that we have in house right there. But uh,
Mm.
that dynamic of media has really dramatically changed, and it won't come back.
You worried about the censorship bills that they're trying to push through, limiting your ability to get these publications out there, get your show out there, even something like X even disappearing.
Very worried about it. You could tell by how obsessed this government has been in the 10 years prior and in the now is continuing. I was kind of hoping that if anything out of Carney was going to come out, he's changing. He's not Trudeau. I know he's still a liberal. I know he's still a globalist, but maybe he wouldn't be as obsessed with controlling speech. But no, he's letting Guilbeault come back with his speech bill yet again, and they're trying to control the internet. That nothing shows a sign of a dictatorship more than trying to control what people can say or hear. That's pure
Mhm.
authoritarianism, and it means they've got bad things in mind. I had the good fortune back in the 80s to travel to the Soviet Union, and I toured through Moscow, Leningrad, as it was called at the time, as a few things. Something that was different when I crossed the border there. They searched our bags and everything. That was normal back then, especially if you're
Mhm.
going to an odd country. But they weren't searching for drugs and guns and things you would see in other countries. They were searching for books, cassettes, magazines, and they would take them if they found them. Because the biggest thing Russia wanted to stop from getting in back then was outside information. That was what the
Mhm.
authoritarian government of Moscow feared more than anything. Authoritarians
Mhm.
always fear that. and they fear it in Ottawa right now, and that's why they want to take control of the internet. And that's very people should be very, very concerned when you see that. Again, they, when they talk about hate speech, yeah, hate speech exists. I hear all sorts of things I can't stand. I hear all sorts of offensive crap. I'm a guy of Jewish heritage. I mean, online, there's no shortage of vile stuff being said, but I just see that as a price for having the free speech and having it out there. And I just have to listen to crap I don't like now and then. I don't want for a second them to start cracking down, because it just gives authoritarians more mechanisms to crack down on everybody. We've really got to be very worried about this. Again, it gets back to where I keep talking about why in-person meetings are so important, because they can't stop that.
No, I agree. And I think we both know those hate speech laws aren't about protecting people from anti-Semitism or child pornography or however they want to spin it. It's about shutting down free speech platforms.
Yeah, we've already got laws to cover those things. You can't go out and say, kill this identifiable group or lynch that identifiable group. You can't post pictures of children in sexual manners. That there's already laws against that we should be better applying, perhaps. We don't need new laws. These things are already against the law. But when you start broadening it beyond people trying to spread, the acts of violence or crime or exploiting children, well, then you're just getting into a very subjective area about what's tolerant or not. And unfortunately, so again, people are going to say some awful things, but we've got to err on the side of freedom when it comes to those. We don't need more laws. Just apply them more stringently on the people who are actually counseling violence and harm, and the people who are actually doing things criminal on the internet. Don't worry about the other stuff. We don't need more laws.
Well, and it's pretty funny if we can't already stop the inappropriate images of children online. We can't stop like pro-Hamas protesters actually asking for violence and eliminate like why do you even think that you could extend your powers into new zones? You're not doing a very good job on these like basic things already. Heck, you guys can't even get the CRA to answer the phone. How about let's just start there. Let's get post handling the mail, CRA picking up the phone, then maybe you can start stretching into these other more creative zones
Well,
here.
and that's one area where I guess we could take a little bit of comfort in. Their own incompetence will make sure that they can't effectively control the internet. There was a big report at the end of the 90s from the CRTC, I think it was 1998, where they did a whole year
Yeah.
of study and said, how are we going to control the internet? And they finally put a release out saying, yeah, we decided we're not going to right now. No, the reality was they couldn't figure out how. That was all it was. And they still don't necessarily know how. It's easy to say you
That
want to
does make
control
me
it.
feel
It's not so
better.
easy to do. Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, but they can still cause a lot of damage trying, though. And
Mhm.
I'd rather they just didn't try in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. What gives you hope right now? Are you nihilistic about Canada? Do you think that there's, just nothing new under the sun? These are the same ups and downs that any country goes through. What gives you hope right now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of positives with Canada. It's a huge country with a massive amount of resources. Having been around the world a bit, it's very peaceful. We've got very good attitudes. Our standard of living has been declining, but we're still incredibly well off in a lot of ways. We're just drifting. I think part of it is we got a little bit
Mhm.
spoiled because things have been a bit too good. But for the most
I
part,
agree.
we're a culture of people who don't want to get violent with each other, that do want to make things better, and we're just adrift right now. But I don't see an apocalypse of burning buildings and everything coming down the streets. But I do believe we're hitting a tipping point. Maybe we're just some very big events have to happen, like an independence movement winning in a province or something like that, to really shake things up, to make things better in the long run. So I mean, it's kind of a negative decline leading to that, but I think it'll lead to something much better afterwards. As I said, when if a province breaks out, I could see that turning into a better system for the whole country. And because the whole country still does have, for the most part, a good foundation of people, a good foundation of resources and wealth and attitude, I really think that again, the whole nation can be built into something much better in the long run.
I agree. Corey, you wrote a book on sovereignty. It's a couple years old, but it's taking off right now. Tell us about it.
Sure, yeah, I wrote the Sovereigntist Handbook. So what it was, well, I wrote it a couple of years ago, and yeah, it really exploded after the last election because it did all right for its first year, anyways. But it was what I'd seen was the sovereignty movement, the independence movement, whether in Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, but a Western thing for sure. Repeating the same mistakes. As I said, when I was 29, I started a party and blew it up. Didn't accomplish too much, but I learned a heck of a lot. So I've put more of the how. If a person wants to learn how to become politically active, how to join a political party, how does it work? What's the structure for it? How to make a basic case for the independence when people ask some of the most common questions. How to balance your life with political activity. I have a chapter where I talk about that. Don't alienate your family and friends over this. Take a breather if you're getting too far. These are things nobody really tells you about if you're becoming politically
Oh,
active. So there's some great books by Michael Wagner, for example, and he's written a number of books on why the West should become independent. I decided to write the book on how. Then, if you've decided it's time to go, well, this is your guidebook, and that's why I call it the handbook. I envision people with a dog-eared copy. Okay, this is how I apply to this situation. This is how I deal with that. And yeah, I put that out, and it's just been very well received and very popular, and gotten good reviews, particularly since the independence movement really livened up, of course.
which is exactly what we talked about today. Yeah, it's one thing to have your opinions, but, like, here's actually how to get it done, and it's
Yes.
not just, like, screaming at everybody and being as
Yeah.
extreme as you possibly
And
can.
of course, yeah, the screen's reversed, I guess, but whatever. I've got the copy on hand, So the flattering cartoonist who showed me in a wetsuit holding the western part of the country above the water, but it is the sovereigntist's handbook, anyways. As part of when you write a book, you've always got copies on you to flog and try to move with folks. But it seems to have been well received and appreciated by a lot of people. As I say at a lot of my speaking events and everything else too, I wrote it in that book. I put a whole bunch of the mistakes I made because I want to inspire people to go out and make a bunch more new mistakes. There's nothing wrong with mistakes. It's just when you repeat them that it's wrong. And
Mm,
once you've made enough mistakes, you finally run out of them. And when you got to that point, you've gotten to where you need to go.
I love that. That's exactly what people need right now. They
Mhm.
don't need more tweets. They need what do you call it? It's not a tweet anymore. What is it?
A post, I guess. It's pretty boring. Tweet
I'm
tweet had a little
even
more character to it.
yeah,
I'm
I got
glad that
tweet.
Musk took over the Twitter, but I think leaving it as called
Yes.
Twitter would have been all right. But well, it's his business. He can do what he wants with it.
You know, when I first went over there, it was such a cesspool, and I was like, "I hate this. I can't be here." But also my algorithm was terrible, so it was only, like, people that I hated and content I didn't wanna see, but I've really learned to love that cesspool. One is, like, that's where all the funny people are, but that's actually where all the news really is as well. But a lot of garbage over there too, but Facebook, that's the real cesspool. Twitter
Yeah.
is like, this is where, like, life is actually happening.
It's really important to media, and that's why it won't die no matter how much the left hates it and how much they keep saying they're going to boycott it. And they tried Mastodon and Blue Sky and wherever else they keep Threads, and it keeps failing because this is the place.
Yeah,
And you've got to watch it, particularly if you're in media, because if anything breaks, it breaks there
yeah.
first. That's the first place you're going to see it.
Yep.
And if you just learn how to navigate it, as you said, yeah, you're still swimming in a cesspool, but you can, believe it or not, make swimming in a cesspool, excuse me, less unpleasant if you know
Yeah.
what you're swimming to look for. Dodge the corn, try to find the good parts, and make the most of it.
Even
If you
Rachel
just
Gilmore, like, a couple times, she's like, "I quit. I'm leaving this platform," and then I'm like, "Good." And then, like, 6 hours later, she's back. I'm like, "You said you left.
yeah,
Get
I
out of
know.
here."
If there was any promise you could have kept, why couldn't it be that one? But you
Yeah.
just gotta look at her, and once in a while I'll take a swipe at her. I can't help myself. Uh, But, it's just learning how to manage it right. I don't get into an extended fight with her on there. I only got so much energy. So if she said something, a little more bizarre than usual, which is quite often, I'll quote tweet it with my cynical little one line response on it, and then just let the fights go. Uh, I find it, but that's what I mean in knowing how to use it rather than immersing yourself. We see people exhaust themselves, and I'm going to get into a 2 hour extended fight with some person back and forth on X. And in the end of it, both people are probably pretty
Yeah.
miserable, and they probably both lost followers because everybody got sick of watching them fight. So just use it as a
Yeah.
tool that you can get the most out of, and don't let it suck the fun out of your life because it can if you keep looking at the wrong part of it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a blood sport. I'm just trying to have more fun with mine lately. It can also just be fun. You don't have to waste your time arguing in the comment section. Where can people find your X account, your journalism? Where's the best place to find you? Is it on X? Is it over at the Western Standard? Where's
Yeah,
you?
the Western Standard, of course. I'm writing there regularly, and my shows go there. On X, I'm Cory B. Morgan. I'm pretty prolific on there, though you'll get a very unfiltered version of me there as well. Epic Times.
You're
If
much
you just
meaner
search
there, but I like it.
and Epic Times, if you just Google Cory Morgan, you'll find kind of the main spots where I tend to pop.
Well, I really appreciate your time here tonight. And just a reminder to all our listeners, this episode is sponsored by Corey's honey.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, if you're in the Calgary area, you want some raw honey, reach out to me. I can hook you up.
Just drowning in it. Awesome, and I'll make sure to tag your columns, your book, everything in the show notes if you guys wanna check it out, and, yeah, just really looking forward to seeing how this whole independence movement materializes. Because I agree, it's a good leverage point for the rest of Canada. Because whatever happens, we need change. It's
That
not
we do.
working the way that we have it going right now.
Absolutely.